happy to welcome Reb Shalom Cook and Reb Binyamin Kleiman, who've come from Yerushalayim and Kiryat Sefer for the Shir this morning, and they listen with us every day and are the drivers behind the monthly Yerushalayim Rosh Chodesh Shir, which Emir Hashem will restart in the spring, and look forward to that. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us every morning. It's lovely to have you with us. The difference between growing and transforming, and we've talked a fair amount about this recently, that it's very different. One can grow and one can transform. One can be a Baal Gaiva and become a Baal Anova. You can be one type of a person and actually become a different type of a person. And Rabbi Lapin used to say in the name of B'Rif Yisrael Salanta that just as you can't see without eyes or hear without ears, you can't transform without Musar. You can learn Torah as much as you want, and you can become a Yoreh Shamayim. Rabbi Yisrael used to say, you can become a frum person. You can become a Yoreh Shamayim, who's careful about all the mitzvahs, who learns Torah. You can become a wonderful person. But to change who you are into somebody better or different, for that you need Musar, and we'll understand that a little bit more deeply, this understanding, and the concern that I've been talking about a lot recently, that so much of our learning is not transformational learning. So much of our learning today is learning which maybe brings growth. Sometimes it only brings growth of knowledge, not even growth of personality. Sometimes it brings growth of personality and character as well. But to really transform, to go from an Amaoritz into a Talmud Chochem, to change the essence of who you are, that needs a particular type of learning that involves Esek HaTorah, it involves hard work, it involves friction, it involves the friction of Musar as well, which we'll see. So we have two psukim to look at. The first is Vayishma Yitro Kohen Midyan Choten Moshe et Kol Asher Asa Elokim LeMoshe Yisrael Amo. Yisro heard everything which Hashem had done for Yisrael. Ki Yotzi Hashem et Yisrael miMitzrayim, how Hashem took Yisrael out of Mitzrayim. Later on, the Torah says Vayikach Yitro Choten Moshe Ula Uzvachim LeElokim. Yisro took an oila, korban oila, a burnt offering, uzvachim, shlomim, and came to Aaron Lech Lechem Im Choten Moshe Lifnei Elokim to bring korbanot before Hashem. The Gemara says from that, it would appear that Yisro brought Shlomim as well as a Korban Olah, and Yitro at that time had the din of a Ben Noach. Everybody had a din of Ben Noach. This was before Har Sinai and before the giving of the Torah. There weren't Jews. There wasn't a Jewish nation. Everybody had the din of a Ben Noach. So you can see from here, even though Yisro had already converted, but he was still a Ben Noach like everybody else, you can see from here that he was allowed to bring Korban Shlomim, which goes against one of the opinions in the Gemara on Daf Kuftes Zayin, where one of the opinions is that Ben Noach cannot bring Korban Shlomim. Ask the Gemara, how lacha Matan Torah udichtiv? That was after Matan Torah. He wasn't a Ben Noach, it was after Matan Torah. Says the Gemara, Hani chalamanda marachar Matan Torah haya. This brings us into the two views as to whether Yisro came to Moshe and converted before the giving of the Torah or after the giving of the Torah. So if you want to say that this all happened after the giving of the Torah, that's why he could bring Shlamim, but normally a Ben Noach is not allowed to bring Shlamim, that works according to the Mandoma. The Yisro came after Matan Torah. But what are we going to say according to the view that Yitro came before Matan Torah? Then the Gemara goes on to say, Ketanai, there are in fact, there's a machlokes Tanoim. This goes back to the time of the Mishnah as to whether Yisro came before or after Matan Torah. Because we have the Chazal, Vayishma Yitro Kohen Midyan, it says in the Torah that Yitro heard, Ma Shmuah Shamauva V'nit Gayer. What was it that he heard that transformed him from a non-Jewish priest into a Ben Torah, and to go through Giyur, to go through conversion? So we have three views. Rabbi Yeshua says he heard Milchemes Amalek. He heard about the war of Amalek. Rabbi Lozer Amodoyi says he heard about Matan Torah. So Rabbi Lozer Amodoyi is the one who says this all happened after Matan Torah. It was in fact the news of Matan Torah that motivated Yisro to come and convert. And Rabbi Lozer, another Rabbi Lozer ben Yaakov, says Kriyas Yamsuf Shamova. He heard about Kriyas Yamsuf. Three different views. Two of them apply to before Matan Torah. So if he heard Amalek, or he heard about Kriyas Yamsuf, he heard before the Torah was given, and that motivated him to come. And according to Rabbi Elazar Hamidoi, he heard about Matan Torah, he heard about the giving of the Torah itself. This Gemara offers us an opportunity to go a little bit more deeply into the famous Rashi in the beginning of Parshas Yisro, where Rashi says, Vayishma Yitro ma shmu'a shama uva. You see that I've put uva in brackets, because there are different girsaot. And in most of our girsaot in Rashi, they've quoted Rashi the way it is in our Gemara. Mashma Shema Uva. But we'll see in the Mizrahi in a moment, the Mizrahi was very meticulous about the girsaot in Rashi, that his girsa in Rashi was Mashma Shema. Just what did he hear? Not Uva. Kriyas Yamsuf and Milchemes Amalek. He heard about Kriyas Yamsuf and Milchemes Amalek. So Rashi chooses two of the three. He doesn't take the view of Rabbi Elazar Hamidoi, which means that Rashi holds that the assumption of the Gemara tends more towards the view that Yisro came before Matan Torah. So he must have heard something that happened before Matan Torah. What was that? The view of Rabbi Yeshua and the view of Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, which is Kriyas Yamsuf u'Milchemes Amalek. He heard about Yamsuf, he heard about Amalek. Asks Reb Meir Soloveitchik. We've used Reb Meshulam David Soloveitchik a lot in this Masechta. Reb Meshulam David was a son of the Brisker Rov, and his younger brother was Reb Meir. And Reb Meir was, you've heard me quote many times, was the person who had so much influence on me and guided me so powerfully, particularly during my period in Rabbonis in Keter Torah in Johannesburg. And Reb Meir asks, what is Rashi asking? Mashmu Hashamar about? The Pasuk tells us, "Vayishma Yitro Chohen Mityan Choten Moshe et Kol Asher Asa Elokim LeMoshe Yisrael Amok Yotzias Hashem Meretz Mitzrayim." He heard the whole story. He heard the whole of Yotzias Mitzrayim. What did he hear? The Torah tells you what he heard. That's Reb Meir's question. The truth is that the Mizrahi asks the same question. Reb Elia Mizrahi is probably the most important parish on Rashi. He was the Rav of Constantinople, the second half of the 15th century, and we know him as the person who was Mefarish Rashi, but his greatness was really as a Rav and Posek. He was a Rosh Yeshiva, he was the Rav of Constantinople, he wrote some amazing Shailas and Shuvas. And I quoted them in the footnotes from one of his Shailas and Shuvas in Siman Pei, where he talks about Hinei biyoti tarud biyuni agadol asher ani mitasek b'divrei hamaor agadol b'ferush hachumash agadol. I've just been terribly busy, he excuses himself, working really hard on the Perush on Rashi. Asher ein shum dibur midiburav she'en tzarich chakira rabba. There is not a word of Rashi that doesn't need deep research. And the Mizrahi was an academic, he was a researcher. He was not only a Godel B'Torah, he was a mathematician, he was a scholar, he was a scientist. He was an amazing person. And he just says every word in Rashi needs such deep analysis. Every source of Rashi, you've got to go back to the source. If you want to learn Rashi, we just go through Rashi quickly. And then we read through in some kind of an English translation. If you want to understand Rashi, you've got to go back to the sources of Rashi, which the Mizrahi does for us. And you've got to understand the source. Here is the source. This Gemara is one of the sources. So the Mizrahi says, "Eino rotze lomar ma shama." Rashi is not coming to teach us what Yisro heard. We know what Yisro heard. So he actually answers Reb Meir's question and says the fact is that's not his intention at all. And he goes on to explain why. Elahachi perusho ma shmu'a shama uva. Here he's using the Gemara again in his text. It doesn't say, it just says ma shmu'a shama. That's what he had in the Rashi, and that's probably the right version of Rashi. And therefore he says, it would seem like the Rashi is coming to tell us what he heard. The Torah tells us what he heard. No, says the Mizrahi. He's coming to tell us what drove him, what motivated him to come all the way from Midian, give up his life there, and come to Moshe Rabbeinu to convert and to live among Bnei Israel. Ma shmu'a shema uva klomar me'eze shmu'a mikol hashmuot sheshama. Of all the different things he heard about the whole story of Yetzias Mitzrayim. Yes, we know that. But of all the things he heard, what was the one thing sheshama nit'orer lavo that motivated him to change his life? Was there one specific thing that motivated him to change his life? And then on that we have these three views as to what it was. What was the thing that motivated him to change his life? Reb Meir brings from his father, the Brisker Rov, who learned this Rashi using a comment of the Kotzker Rebbe. And the Kotzker Rebbe explains that, yes, this is not about Eze Shmuah Shama, it's not about what he heard, it's what about motivating him to come. Asks the Kotzker Rov, so why these two specifically? He heard Kriyas Yamsuf, is that not enough? Amalek, why is Amalek so important? How does that all fit in? And the Kotzker Rov explained it's the two together. That Rashi is merging. What Rashi is saying is that there's not a machlokes between Rabbi Yeshua, who says it was Amalek, and Rabbi Eliezer, who says it was Kriyas Yamsuf. Yes, there's a machlokes between them and Rabbi Eliezer Hamoidoi, who says it happened after Matan Torah. But those who say it happened before Matan Torah, that's Rabbi Yeshua, who says it was about Amalek that he heard, and Rabbi Eliezer, who says it was about Kriyas Yamsuf. Each one is just talking about which was the dominant motivator. But you need the second motivator to understand the dominant motivator. Says the Kotzker Rebbe, what Yisro noticed was he heard about Kriyas Yamsuf. And he thought, oh my goodness, Kriyas Yamsuf, the Ribbono Shel Olam is absolutely amazing, incredible. One has to serve the Ribbono Shel Olam and nobody else. That's absolutely clear. And then he heard about Amalek. And he couldn't figure that out. I've just heard about Kriyas Yamsuf. And the whole world is heard about Kriyas Yamsuf. And later on, as the Mizrahi brings, we'll hear how Rachav Hazono says in Yoshua that there in Canaan they heard about Yamsuf. And they're terrified of the Ribbono Shel Olam, having heard of Kriyas Yamsuf. So everybody's heard of Kriyas Yamsuf. How on earth does somebody like Amalek have the chutzpah to try and beat Bnei Yisrael after they've heard about Kriyas Yamsuf? It doesn't make any sense. It would be like nowadays, after all the miracles that have happened, why are they still going? What do they think? They're eventually going to get us after all that's happened? We're reliving that same question that Yisro had. How after Kriyas Yamsuf? How after all the nisim we've had just in the last 2 years, let alone what's happened before then? After all these nisim, you think you're going to beat Klal Yisrael? Amalek, you think after Kriyas Yamsuf, God's going to stand back and let you do what you want and destroy the Jewish people? How does that happen? Yisro thinks about it, says the Kotzker Rebbe, and he realizes dramatic events don't transform people. They're one-day wonders. The day they happen, they're amazing. I remember after the 6-Day War, those of you who will remember, it felt not as if Mashiach could come, but as if Mashiach was coming. There was such a hisorus of tshuva. The whole nation was united in emunah and bitochen. And you thought, now Mashiach has to come. And that lasted for less than a week. By a week, the media was starting and everybody was explaining it, and the excitement was gone. A dramatic event is a one-day wonder. It doesn't last. Says the Kotzker Rebbe, Yisro understood if you want it to last, you need a Rebbe. You can't just hear something. You can't just learn something. It doesn't help. Yisro was thinking to himself, I'll stay in Midian and I'll watch YouTube and I'll download Shiurim. There's as much Torah as I want. I don't have to go and schlep to Moshe Rabbeinu. I understand, I'll serve God. I'll get an art scroll and I'll know how to daven. I'll get a chumash with Rashi in English and I'll be able to learn on my own. He realizes from Amalek, you can't learn on your own. You can learn on your own. You can grow in Torah on your own, but you can't transform on your own. That's not going to happen. For that you need a Rebbe. Because what does a Rebbe do? A Rebbe is somebody you have empowered to call you on your rubbish, to call you on your stuff, to point out to you when you're not doing what you need to do, when you're not living the way you need to live, when you're not stretching yourself the way you could stretch. And we're living in a period now of people learning Torah without Rabbeim. Not a Rebbe in the terms of a teacher, of a Cheder Rebbe. In terms of a Rebbe, a person who engages, a coach, somebody who stands by you and stretches you and pushes you. Business people are now understanding this. Every person, if you want to transform, if you want to really grow in business, you need a coach. Somebody who will call you, who will challenge you, who will stretch you, who will push you. And in Torah, we're trying to go through the whole process of learning Torah online and all sorts of other ways, and learning Bikiyos and just going to Shiurim and thinking that that's going to transform us. It's not going to transform us, says the Kotzker Rebbe. Yisro realized, I need a Rebbe. And he went to Moshe Rabbeinu and said, will you be my Rebbe? That's what was important. And that's Rabbi Yisrael Salanter's idea that Rabbi Lapin says that you can't transform without Musa. But I want to take that one step further. What happens if we go according to the view that Yisro was after Kriyas Matan Torah? Is that really a different view, or does that view also integrate all three? And I would suggest that that view also integrates all three. So although that's not the way Rashi goes, Rashi holds that the Gemara tends towards Yisro coming before Matan Torah, but there is a view of Rabbi Lozer Amridoi that it all happened after Matan Torah. Do we still need Amalek and Kriyas Yamsuf to be part of Yisro's transformation? And I would say yes, we just take it one step further, and we'll see this in the Ramban, that what Yisro discovered was, yes, you can hear about Kriyas Yamsuf and you can think you'll never be the same again. I'm now frum, I'm serving God, I believe in God, this is amazing, it's incredible. And a week later there's nothing there and you can be an Amalek. For that you need Torah. So instead of going the line of Musa, the way the Kotzker goes, just the Torah has the capacity to do that. How does Torah do it and what does Torah do? There's the famous Ramban at the end of Parshas Bo, which everybody has to read regularly and know and understand, where the Ramban talks about why those amazing miracles happened at that time and have never happened since. And he says the purpose of those nisim, of changing nature, is to teach us that there's a Rebbeinu Shel Olam, and to give us the capacity to deny all the theories of the time that there's no God. But then he says, many mitzvahs have been established to embed that in us. And he says, mitzvahs rabba zechel yetzias Mitzrayim. There are many mitzvahs that are zechel yetzias Mitzrayim. V'achol liyot lanu b'chol hadorot edut b'moftim shelo yishtakachu. And all the mitzvahs are there to remind us not to forget the miracles. V'lo yepitchom peh lekofer lachish emunat ha'elokim. And there should be no ability to deny belief in Hashem. Ki hakoneh mezuzah bezuz echad ukva'a befitcho. If a person simply buys a mezuzah for one zuz, I don't know where you get a mezuzah nowadays for a zuz, but in those days you could. V'nitkavein be'inyana, and he had the right kavaneh, kvar hoda bechidush ha'olam, just by putting the mezuzah on your door. You're understanding the chidush ha'olam, you're admitting to the renewal of the world. And to accepting of Hashem and His Ashkocha and Nevuah and so on. And therefore the Gemara says, be careful about little mitzvahs, because there's no little mitzvah. Every little mitzvah is a big mitzvah. Every little mitzvah is remembering and acknowledging who Hashem is. It's interesting, I saw in one of the WhatsApp groups looking for volunteers, the army needs urgently 50,000 pairs of tzitzis. 50,000 pairs of tzitzis. The army needs. And just putting on a pair of tzitzis, even if that's all the chayal does, he's being moedeh, he's accepting the Rebbeinu Shel Olam, says the Rambam. And once you understand through the doing of the mitzvahs the greatness of the big miracles, you'll understand the little miracles that happen to you every day. And that's the yesod of emunah, is to see the miraculous hand of God in what we do every day of our lives and how the Rebbeinu Shem relates to us. And so you see what the Torah does is the way the Ramban learns. Mitzvahs take events like Yetzias Mitzrayim, and like Mechias Amalek, and like Kriyas Yamsuf, and turns them into mitzvahs. They're not pieces of history that you read in the library or that you study at college. They're things you live every day. You put a mezuzah on your door, you look at your tzitzis, you remember Mechias Amalek when it comes Purim time. There are mitzvahs that you do over and over again. It's the doing of the mitzvahs that embeds events and life experiences, going back to the creation of the world and Yetzias Mitzrayim, all of those life events that have to be embedded in our national psyche, in our deep spiritual psyche, all of those events are embedded not because they're recorded in history, not because our forefathers experienced them, but because we relive them constantly through the Torah we learn and practice. That's what Yisro understood. This is going to be a one-day wonder unless I convert what I've learned into practice, unless I convert what I've learned into daily avodas Hashem. And for that I need a Torah. For that I've got to go to Moshe Rabbeinu and I've got to learn Torah, study Torah, and keep Torah with everybody. And that's what the things we do as one-day practices, as daily practices, even our getting together every day to learn the Matmonim, to go deeply into one or two lines of Gemara, to go really deeply into them. But to do that every day converts the knowledge into practice. And all these good Jews who come to daven Shachris, you're welcome to come a few minutes earlier and to join us. It's not an exclusive shir. It's for anybody who wants to learn Torah for a few minutes before the day starts, and to be able to understand something new, something different that can change, that can truly transform who we are from who we were.